I knew my son wanted my house, long before he ever tried to take it from me. Greed rarely introduces itself honestly. It arrives disguised as concern, lowers its voice, and asks whether you are sure you can manage on your own. My name is Evelyn Carter. I was 74 years old when the people I trusted most decided that my age had made me easy to erase. I had lived in that house for 43 years. The mortgage nearly swallowed us during the first decade. George worked evenings at the printing plant, and I took bookkeeping jobs from neighbors after putting the children to bed. The receipt from that last payment still rested in a blue folder inside my desk. To anyone else, the house was brick, wood, and land. To me, it was the record of an entire life. George's photograph stood beside the fireplace, his smile frozen beneath the sunlight that had entered through the same window for decades. Pencil marks climbed the kitchen doorway, labeled with our children's names and ages. Outside, every rosebush in our garden remembered George's hands. Mark saw none of that when he visited. He saw square footage. "You know, Mom," he said one Sunday, looking around the dining room, "this place must be worth a fortune now." I poured his coffee. "Then it is fortunate I already own it." He smiled, but his eyes remained on the windows. "It is too much house for one person." "It was enough house for 6 people. I think I can manage." He mentioned loose rugs, steep stairs, and winter maintenance. Together, his warnings formed a cage built from concern. Rachel, his wife, was gentler. She would touch my arm and say, "We only want you safe." Safety, I would learn, was the word they used when they wanted control. I would leave when I chose, not when someone decided my life had become inconvenient. George had once made me promise that nobody would push me out of the home we built. I did not know that one day the person pushing would be our son. The fall happened on a Tuesday morning. I was carrying tea when my heel caught water near the sink. I struck the floor hard enough to lose my breath. Pain shot through my hip, and the cup shattered beside me. I lay there for almost 20 minutes before I reached the telephone. At the hospital, the doctor found no fracture, only a severe bruise and strained muscles. He recommended rest, a walking frame, and several weeks of physical therapy. He did not recommend permanent care. "So she should not be alone," Mark said. "For a few days, perhaps," the doctor replied. "But there is no reason she cannot return home once she is moving safely." Mark nodded as though he agreed. Later, he told me I should stay with him. Rachel said their guest room was being renovated, and their bathroom had no safety rails. She had already researched a private rehabilitation facility called Meadowbrook. "Just 2 weeks," she said, "like a hotel with nurses." I hated the idea, but pain makes even strong people tired. Mark sat beside my hospital bed and held my hand. "No decisions without you," he promised. "We are only helping you recover." That promise was the last thing I carried willingly into Meadowbrook. Before we left my house, Rachel moved through my rooms with a canvas folder. She collected my identification, insurance cards, medication list, bank statements, and house keys. "Admission paperwork," she explained. I thanked her. That is the cruelest part of betrayal. Sometimes you help the person preparing to destroy you. Meadowbrook looked peaceful from the road. Flower boxes hung beneath white windows, and a polished sign promised compassionate care. Inside, the carpets were thick, the halls smelled of disinfectant, and every door closed with a soft mechanical click. A receptionist placed several forms in front of Mark. He signed where she pointed. "I should read those," I said. "You already went through everything with your son," she replied brightly. "No, I did not." Her smile barely changed. "We can review them later, Mrs. Carter. You must be exhausted." My room held a narrow bed, 1 chair, and a wardrobe. I unpacked enough for 2 weeks. On the 3rd day, I asked about my discharge date. The nurse checked a chart. "You are registered as a long-term resident." "That is wrong." She looked uncomfortable. "Your son completed the placement documents." "My son does not decide where I live." She promised to speak with administration. Nobody came. The next morning, I asked for my phone. A staff member told me it was being kept at the front desk because family members had reported that calls made me agitated. I laughed because the statement was absurd. The staff member did not laugh. Mark visited twice during the first week. He spoke of memory episodes and resistance to care. When I corrected him, he sighed with patient sadness, performing the role of the devoted son burdened by a difficult mother. "You said 2 weeks," I reminded him. "We need to see how you progress." "The doctor said I could go home." "You do not remember everything the doctor said." I stared at him. I remember his name, the date, the time of the appointment, and the dosage written on my discharge sheet. Mark turned toward the nurse. "This is what I mean, she fixates." He had found a way to turn every proof of clarity into evidence against me. For several days, I doubted myself, not because my memory failed, but because everyone around me behaved as though it had. A locked door is obvious. A prison made of polite voices is harder to fight. Then Maya noticed me. She was a young nurse who listened before speaking. One evening, she brought my medication and asked whether I knew what each tablet was for. I named them, listed the doses, and explained that one pill had been moved from morning to evening after my blood pressure dropped during a checkup 6 months earlier. Maya examined the chart. "You remember all that." "I remember what matters." Over the next week, she tested me gently. She asked about dates, meals, staff names, and appointments. I answered every question. More importantly, she began asking what I wanted. Nobody else had done that. The truth reached me through a photograph. During recreation, a staff member named Lee showed residents' houses for sale on a tablet. I barely watched until a familiar red door appeared on the screen. My red door. "Stop," I said. Lee paused. The listing showed my address beneath the words "vacant property," immediate possession available. I took the tablet with trembling hands. The living room appeared next. George's photograph was gone. The sofa had been moved beneath the window. My books had vanished from the shelves. In the dining room, pale decorations covered the table where my family had shared Christmas dinners. A sign stood in the garden between the roses George planted. "For sale." My sewing cabinet was missing. So was George's clock. The blue chair from our bedroom was gone. The listed agent was Rachel's cousin, Melissa Dane. Lee asked whether I felt unwell. "That is my house," I whispered. Mark visited the following afternoon. "You listed my property for sale." He did not ask how I knew. That told me everything. "Mom, we discussed this." "No, we did not." "You agreed after the fall." "I agreed to 2 weeks of rehabilitation." His expression softened, but there was no kindness in it. "You signed documents." "Show them to me." "You probably do not remember signing." I saw relief flicker across his face. He wanted witnesses to see an unstable old woman attacking her helpful son. So I lowered my voice. "I remember paying for that house. I remember burying your father. I remember every promise you made at the hospital. Do not mistake my age for absence." Mark leaned closer. "Be careful. Outbursts like this are exactly why the staff believes you need permanent care." Then he left. He was not only stealing my home, he was stealing my right to describe what was happening. That evening, I told Maya, "I need documents from my file." She hesitated. "Administration may require a formal request." "Then help me make one." 2 days later, Maya entered with copies hidden beneath a towel and locked the door. The first document granted Mark broad power over my finances and property. The signature resembled mine, but the final curve in Carter tilted the wrong way. I had signed my name for more than 60 years. That signature was not mine. The second document was worse. A private care consultant named Dr. Adrian Bell claimed I showed advanced cognitive decline, poor judgment, and an inability to understand financial decisions. According to the report, he had evaluated me 3 weeks before my fall. I had never met him. Another page stated that I voluntarily chose permanent residential care. Another authorized Mark to prepare the house for immediate sale. Together, the lies created a life in which my voice no longer mattered. Maya pointed to a phone number. "Do you know this consultant?" "No." "Are you certain?" "I remember every doctor who has examined me since George died." My hands shook, but not from confusion. Mark had planned this before I fell. The accident had only given him his opening. The next betrayal arrived through family. My niece called the front desk and was allowed to speak with me for 5 minutes. She said Mark had told everyone the house needed to be sold to pay for my care. "He is making such a difficult sacrifice," she said. "You are lucky he is handling everything." Lucky. Relatives praised him for carrying the burden of my existence. Publicly, he was loyal. Privately, he used my age as a weapon. After the call, I cried for the first time. Not because of the house. I cried because Mark had made my family admire him for betraying me. The woman in room 214 heard me. Her name was Dorothy Lane. She was 81, small and sharp-faced, with silver hair she pinned neatly each morning. She placed a handkerchief on my table and waited. "They sold mine too," she said. I looked at her. "My daughters placed me here after pneumonia. They said it was temporary. When I recovered, my apartment was gone. Furniture, dishes, photographs, everything." "Did you fight?" "Not soon enough." Every quiet day could be described as agreement. Every unanswered lie could harden into fact. "Write everything," she said. "Names, dates, exact words. Memory is truth, but paper makes strangers respect it." Maya brought me a notebook disguised beneath puzzle pages. I recorded staff interactions, Mark's visits, medication changes, and every detail I remembered from the property listing. I wrote at night, hiding the notebook behind a loose wardrobe panel. Maya contacted Helen Brooks, an elder rights advocate known for challenging unlawful placements. Helen came 3 days later, signed in as a family friend. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Your son expects people to question you. We are going to make questioning you very difficult." Helen arranged an independent medical and cognitive evaluation. Mark learned about it and called administration, insisting that outside visitors distressed me. Helen produced written authorization showing that I had requested the appointment myself. The doctor arrived on a rainy morning. He asked the date, location, and why I was at Meadowbrook. He gave me words to remember, numbers to reverse, and situations to explain. Then he asked me to describe the events beginning with my fall. I told him everything in order. The spilled water, the hospital, the promise of 2 weeks, Rachel collecting my documents, the long-term placement, the missing phone, the listing, the false consultant, the forged signature. When I finished, he closed his folder. "Mrs. Carter, you show no evidence of severe cognitive impairment. You understand your circumstances and are fully capable of making decisions." The words did not restore a mind I had never lost. They gave me proof that others could not easily ignore. Helen explained the possible offenses: fraud, forgery, elder financial abuse, coercive control, and unlawful deprivation of property. She would contact investigators and seek an emergency order. Then her voice changed. "The sale is scheduled to close in 4 days. Can you stop it?" "I will try." "Can you promise?" She looked at me honestly. "No." That answer settled something inside me. Mark controlled the house, the keys, the listing, and the story everyone had heard. Legal papers might eventually prove him guilty, but eventually would not matter if strangers were already carrying boxes through my front door. "I am going home," I said. Helen advised patience. She warned Mark might claim I had wandered away. "I will not wander," I replied. "I will leave with written approval, medical proof, and witnesses." Maya documented my request for voluntary discharge and attached the competency report. Helen arranged transportation. I packed one dress, my notebook, the forged papers, George's photograph, and the original deed Maya had helped recover from a stored document envelope. Before dawn, Dorothy stood in my doorway. "Mark believes the woman he locked in here no longer exists," she said. I buttoned my coat. Then he is about to meet her again. At 6:15, I walked through Meadowbrook's front doors. The morning air was cold, clean, and entirely my own. As the car pulled away, Meadowbrook shrank behind me, but the fear it had planted did not. I understood now how easily a person could disappear without ever leaving the world. No chains had held me. No one had shouted threats. They had simply repeated that I was confused until strangers mistook repetition for truth. Mark had counted on my embarrassment, my pain, and my love for him. He expected me to protect him from consequences, because mothers are taught to forgive before anyone asks whether forgiveness is safe. I watched the streets pass and remembered driving Mark to school through those same intersections. Back then, he had trusted me to know every turn. Now he had told the world I could not find my way home. The contrast cut deeper than the forged signature, yet beneath the grief was a steadier feeling. I was no longer traveling as the mother who hoped her son would explain everything. I was traveling as the owner of a stolen story, determined to reclaim every room, every memory, and every piece of my own name. Across town, Mark and Rachel were preparing coffee for the buyers, certain I was safely confined behind polite walls. They did not know I was coming. They did not know what I carried. Most of all, they did not know that the mother they had dismissed, as weak, had finally stopped asking permission to survive. The car stopped half a block from my house, because Helen believed arriving quietly would give us a few minutes before Mark understood what was happening. I could already see unfamiliar vehicles in the driveway. One belonged to Melissa, Rachel's cousin and the real estate agent. Another was a dark sedan I assumed belonged to the buyers. Through the front window, I saw people moving from room to room as though my home were already theirs. For 1 second, fear pressed against my ribs. Then I remembered Meadowbrook's locked doors, Mark's patient smile, and the false signature beneath my name. I stepped out of the car. Helen stayed behind to make a call. I walked toward the house alone, carrying my bag in one hand and my cane in the other. I wanted Mark to see exactly who had returned. Rachel noticed me first. She was standing near the front steps, arranging flowers beside the door. Her smile disappeared. "Oh my goodness," she said loudly. "Are you lost?" For a moment, she pretended not to know me. Perhaps she hoped the buyers would see only an elderly woman in a borrowed coat, confused and wandering. Then Mark came into the hallway. His face turned pale. "Mom." I did not answer immediately. I reached beneath the collar of my coat and pulled out the spare key George had hidden inside the garden shed years ago. Mark had changed nothing because he never knew it existed. The lock turned. I entered my own house. George's chair was gone. Our wedding photograph sat inside a cardboard box near the stairs. Small white price stickers had been placed on lamps, tables, and cabinets. Rachel had filled my kitchen shelves with decorative jars while my dishes were stacked in the garage. They had not prepared the house for sale. They had prepared it to forget me. A middle-aged couple stood beside Melissa in the dining room. They looked embarrassed. I faced them calmly. "My name is Evelyn Carter," I said. "I am the legal owner of this property. I have never agreed to sell it." The silence that followed was the first honest thing that house had heard in weeks. Mark moved toward me quickly. "Mom, you should not be here. That is a strange thing to say to the woman whose name is on the deed." The buyers exchanged a glance. Rachel stepped beside Mark and lowered her voice. "She has dementia," Mark told them. "She becomes confused and sometimes aggressive. The facility must not have realized she left." He reached for my elbow as if guiding a frightened child. I pulled away. "Do not touch me." His expression tightened. "You see, this is exactly what we have been dealing with." I opened my bag and removed the independent competency report. "This assessment was completed yesterday. by a physician who found no evidence of severe cognitive impairment. Melissa took a step back. Mark barely looked at the paper. She does not understand what it says. I understand every word. The front door opened behind us. Helen walked in carrying a leather folder. She introduced herself as my advocate and placed documents on the dining table. There was a formal notice disputing the sale, copies of the suspected forgeries, and evidence that Dr. Adrian Bell, the consultant who supposedly examined me, had never entered Meadowbrook or billed for an appointment with me. Helen also carried an emergency request to freeze any transfer of ownership. The prospective buyer picked up the notice, read the first page, and set it down immediately. "We are not proceeding," he said. His wife nodded. "Not until this is resolved." Melissa turned to Rachel. "You told me everything was legitimate." "It was," Rachel said. Then she looked at Mark. "At least that is what he told me." Mark stared at her. "You signed the witness statement," he said. "Because you said your mother had agreed. You were there when we discussed the money." Their voices sharpened. Minutes earlier, they had stood together like partners protecting a family decision. Now consequences had entered the room, and loyalty abandoned them. Greed had united them. Fear began pulling them apart. Mark tried to regain control. "This is a private family matter." "No," I said. "You made it public when you listed my home." I placed my hidden notebook on the table. Every page carried a date. I had recorded the hospital conversation, Rachel collecting my documents, Mark's promises, the false long-term placement, my requests for a telephone, the listing photographs, the names of staff members, and every threat disguised as concern. Mark looked at the notebook with contempt. "Anyone can write a story." "True," Helen said. "That is why we also collected evidence." She read from Maya's signed statement. Maya confirmed that I consistently remembered medication schedules, medical history, appointments, and conversations. She documented that Mark had instructed staff to restrict my calls and ignore repeated requests to leave. She described how he labeled me confused whenever I discussed my property, although I spoke clearly about every other subject. Helen then placed bank records beside the statement. Mark's plan for the sale proceeds had been careful, but not careful enough. A large portion was intended to settle his personal debts. Another transfer was marked for Rachel's failing interior design business. There was a draft deposit agreement for a larger house in their names. Only a small fraction had been reserved for my supposed lifetime care. My relatives had been told that Mark was sacrificing everything to protect me. The documents showed the opposite. He had treated my life like a closing balance. My quiet notes, which he would have dismissed as an old woman's rambling, now connected every lie he had told. He had performed devotion in public while planning theft in private. For the first time, Mark stopped looking confident. He looked cornered. The buyers left. Melissa gathered her papers, muttering that she needed legal advice. Rachel moved toward the kitchen, but Helen asked everyone to remain until investigators arrived. That was when Mark finally dropped the mask. "All right," he said. "You want honesty, fine." He turned toward me. "You are living alone in a house worth more than you could ever spend. Half the rooms are empty. The place needs repairs. You barely use the upstairs. What exactly are you protecting?" "My home. It is a building. To you." His face reddened. "I have helped you for years. I handled bills, appointments, repairs. I left work early when you called. I sacrificed time with my own family. You visited when it suited you and submitted payments from my account. That is not the point." "Then tell me the point." He struck the table with his palm. "I deserve something." The words hung between us. Not concern, not necessity, not safety. Entitlement. "You were going to leave it to me eventually," he continued. "Selling now changes nothing. It only gives us access when we need it." "Us?" "My family. I am your family." He looked away. In that moment, I understood the deepest betrayal. Mark had not forgotten that I was alive. He had decided my life mattered less than what he expected to receive after it ended. To him, inheritance was delayed ownership. I was merely the delay. "You believe being my son makes you entitled to everything I built," I said. "But family creates responsibility, not ownership." He laughed bitterly. "Easy for you to say, you already have everything. Your father and I worked for it. And what did I get? A home, an education, help with your first apartment, support every time you failed and began again. That was what parents are supposed to do." "Yes, because love gives without calculating a return. What you gave me was not loyalty. It was an investment you expected to collect." His anger vanished for a moment, replaced by something smaller. Shame, perhaps. But shame without accountability is only self-pity. A knock sounded at the door. 2 police officers entered with an adult protection investigator. Helen handed them the documents. They separated us and began asking questions. Rachel requested a private conversation almost immediately. "I will cooperate," she said. "Mark handled the paperwork." Mark stared at her with disbelief. "You found Bell. You said he was legitimate. You wrote the listing. Because you promised your mother had agreed." They were no longer husband and wife defending a shared plan. They were 2 frightened people trying to decide whose betrayal would be most useful. An officer asked Mark to step outside. Before he went, he turned to me. "Mom, please." It was the first time. That day, he sounded like my son. Later, while the investigators reviewed documents in the dining room, Mark asked to speak with me in the hallway. Helen stayed close enough to hear. He lowered his voice. "If you press charges, I will lose everything." I looked at him. "My job, my marriage. The children may never forgive me. You were willing to take my home. I made a mistake." "A mistake is forgetting an appointment. You created documents declaring me mentally incompetent." His eyes filled with tears. For one dangerous second, I saw the boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. I remembered tying his shoes, packing his lunches, and waiting beside the window when he was late coming home. Love does not disappear simply because someone betrays you. That is what makes betrayal painful. Part of me wanted to protect the child I remembered. Another part saw the man who had confined me, silenced me, and trained strangers to distrust my voice. If I protected him again, he might learn only that I could still be used. If I pursued him from rage alone, then his cruelty would decide who I became. Helen spoke quietly. "Accountability is not vengeance, Evelyn." I nodded. "I will tell the truth," I said to Mark. "Every part of it. What happens after that belongs to the law and to your choices." He covered his face. I felt grief, but not guilt. Silence would not have saved my family. It would only have saved the lie. The sale was formally suspended that afternoon. Within days, Mark's power of attorney was revoked. Meadowbrook began an internal review and acknowledged that my permanent placement had relied on misleading information supplied by family members. I returned home, but returning was not the same as feeling safe. Every room carried evidence of invasion. Drawers had been opened. Papers had been moved. My clothes smelled of cardboard from the garage. So I began again. I changed the locks, banking passwords, legal representatives, medical contacts, and emergency instructions. I arranged for account alerts and gave Helen authority to review unusual transactions. I hired a licensed home care assistant for several hours each week, but the agreement was written in my name and followed my decisions. At first, accepting help frightened me. Mark had taught me that assistance could become control. Maya taught me something different. Real help does not shrink you. It gives you room to stand. Neighbors returned furniture purchased at the rushed estate sale. One brought back George's clock. Another found my sewing cabinet in Melissa's storage unit. Together, we unpacked photographs and replaced them on the walls. When George's chair came home, I sat beside it and cried. not because everything had been restored. Some things never could be. I cried because the house no longer felt like evidence. It was becoming a home again. Maya visited on Sunday. Dorothy came 2 weeks later after Meadowbrook approved the trip. She touched the kitchen doorway where the children's heights were marked. "You made it back," she said. "So will you," I told her. The investigation lasted months. Authorities found sufficient evidence of forgery, attempted fraud, coercive control, and elder financial abuse. Rachel accepted a reduced penalty after providing messages showing that she and Mark had discussed placing me in care before my fall. She admitted they had viewed the accident as an opportunity to accelerate their plan. Mark lost all access to my finances. He faced criminal charges, civil claims, and the collapse of the reputation he had built around being a devoted son. Several relatives called to apologize. They said Mark had sounded convincing. They said they had not wanted to interfere. They said they assumed I was confused because he spoke with such confidence. I listened, but I did not offer immediate forgiveness. "You could have called me," I told them. "You chose to discuss my mind without asking me what I remembered." Age had made it easy for them to believe I was unreliable. My calmness had made it easy for them to remain comfortable. Some relationships were rebuilt slowly, others ended. Boundaries were not cruelty. They were the doors I learned to lock after discovering who was willing to enter without permission. Months later, spring returned to the garden. I stood among the roses George and I had planted and watched new leaves open along the stems. The house behind me still needed repairs. My hip still ached in cold weather. My family was not whole. But I was free. With Helen's help, I created a small fund offering independent legal consultations to older adults facing care agreements, property transfers, or sudden powers of attorney. It was not large, but it gave people a chance to hear an honest explanation before signing away control. Dorothy used the service to review what her daughters had done. She could not recover everything, but she recovered photographs, savings, and the right to participate in decisions about her future. I also changed my will. Mark would not inherit the house. Part of my estate would support elder protection services. The remainder would go to people and organizations that had treated me as a person rather than a problem. Some called that punishment. It was not. Inheritance is not a reward for blood. It is a final statement about what we value. One evening, I stood on the front steps as the sun lowered behind the garden. I opened the red door and listened to the familiar creak. Once, I had opened it to prove the house belonged to me. Now I opened it simply because I chose to enter. Mark tried to turn my age into weakness.